Okay, and the Leprechaun continues. I'm honestly not even quite sure where to start with this one, but this is Leprechaun 5 in the Hood. And my friend Jason, aka the Ginger Ninja, awesome guy. I will leave a link to his channel in the description. But in any case, God bless the man because he tried to warn me about this one. He really did, folks. He did his due diligence, but I didn't listen. Let that be a lesson to everybody. In the future, listen to the Ginger Ninja. He knows what he's talking about. Anyway, yes indeed, this is Leprechaun in the Hood. Directing duties on this one are overtaken by Rob Spera, and I haven't always commented on the screenwriters necessarily, I know, but I feel compelled to mention in this case that this movie was, well, first of all, the story was drafted by 4 people, and then the screenplay was written by another 2 people. So that's 6 different personalities that have labored over this screenplay. Like, whenever there's that many writers involved, that's usually not a good sign. I even found out that one of the actors in this one, Anthony Montgomery, who plays Postmaster P, oh, Jesus Christ, Postmaster P. He apparently actually contributed some writing and vocals himself, which I guess on the one hand, good for you for being so gung-ho, but like, yeah, you can feel it in some of not just his line delivery, but throughout the movie. I mean, before we even get into anything else, I've just got to say, like, the dialogue in this is just like, holy crap. It really feels like a movie's worth of those like sort of skit intervals that you would get on hip hop records in the 90s, like those little intros, outros. Sometimes they would be in the middle. You know what I'm talking about. But it really is like running a medley of those without the hip hop tunes to kind of fill it out. Oh, but I hear some of you saying Ice-T's in the mix. I mean, how could the music be bad with Ice-T up in here? Well, I mean, even Ice-T, as awesome as he is subject, like the rest of us, to lapses in judgment. And unfortunately, the Piper definitely came for his paycheck on this one as far as Ice-T is concerned. The movie starts out with him decked out in a Motown outfit, and then even when it fast forwards to 20 years later when he's a big-time record producer, he is just chewing the scenery and speaking in sound bites. It almost feels at times like he studied Charlie Heath's performance in Leprechaun 3, and took his cues from there. Because you get a whole lot of scenery chewing acting from Mr. Ice-T in this one. And on a side note, I will say I am not being the least bit ironic when I praise Ice-T, because this guy creatively has always been willing to take chances as a hip-hop artist that no one else would. He has always been a huge champion for underground metal and death metal. And like, seriously, go and listen to Body Count right now, their first album. It still holds up. Swear to God, I am not even kidding. That is a stone cold classic. Almost makes me wish this movie was The Leprechaun meets Body Count. I mean, I think that would have been a million times more fun. Because the majority of this movie doesn't even involve the Leprechaun, really. Like, much like the previous film, the Leprechaun is essentially a guest in his own show here. And that wasn't such a big deal in Leprechaun 4 in space, because that whole movie was basically just a big joke. It was very squarely a comedy, not a horror comedy, not a horror movie. It knew it was a hot mess, and it just decided to have as much fun with it as it could. And while Leprechaun in the Hood is similarly not a horror movie or even horror adjacent by any working definition, it still seems like it is actually trying to take its story about these 3 guys trying to make it as a hip-hop act seriously, like we gave a shit. But that is sort of, I think, where you can feel those corporate, cynical gears grinding in terms of the production. Because believe it or not, this movie is sucking on the trope tit even harder than Leprechaun 4 did. Because this came out in 2000, right? This was sort of right around the time when hip-hop had really blown up big. The late 90s definitely belonged to hip-hop, commercially speaking. I don't think anyone's disputing that at this point. And as a result of that, of course, you had lots of hip-hop artists crossing over into film, some more seriously than others. Some actually made a valid effort to try and act, like Tupac, for example. Others just showed up and were who they were. Coolio did that in Batman and Robin, and in this movie too. Like, really, he just pops up and that's it. It's just Coolio and he's there. And the movie even slams on the brakes and has a character in the crowd point out, that's Coolio, in case you missed the point. I mean, this is just another paycheck for him, like Batman and Robin was. I'm amazed that they didn't just have him say out loud, pay me. Hip hop artists, continued to show up in films, particularly in horror films. You had LL Cool J in Halloween. And God forbid I forget Busta Rhymes. And because direct to video hadn't disappeared at that point, a lot of these hip hop artists were even making their own films and releasing them direct to video. Although Bones, Snoop Dogg's movie, did come out the following year, and that was released theatrically. I'm sure some of you remember Bones. And look, Bones might not be a stone cold classic, but movies like Bones and other films of that ilk were at least very sincere and reverent about their sort of homage to the blaxploitation genre. I mean, at the risk of sounding like I'm pandering, these were films that were made by African Americans and, primarily for African Americans. And they felt like that. They felt authentic. Leprechaun in the Hood, on the other hand, was directed by Rob Spira. This is a movie set in the hood, quote unquote, diving deep into hip hop culture, cast almost exclusively with African Americans, which is a good thing, but overseen and directed by a white American. And it feels like that. Like, this feels like an ignorant white North American's idea of a hip hop film. I mean, the ghetto in this film has a small parish where even the priest keeps a gun in the altar, for Christ's sake. Oh, see what I did there? No pun intended, that's just a slip. And that church also facilitates the second official Jameson Award nomination in my little sweepstakes. I mean, really, if I wanted to be completely honest, I could probably just give this whole movie a Jameson Award nomination, but I think that would be stacking the odds a little bit too much in its favor. So I'll just distill it down to one golden moment here. At one point, our heroes, this little hip-hop trio, are tasked with performing gospel for this church. And they try to improvise a gospel song on the spot. And the lyrics that they come up with in the first sort of 10 to 20 seconds of their song consist of, Jesus loves me, this I know. If he don't, I'll find a hoe. Like, wow, man. Just wow. I don't know what it was about that moment that got me, but it really did. Manages to sort of not only be completely goofy on the surface, but it's really kind of a vague character assassination of that entire gospel culture. Ice-T's character is named Mac Daddy. Yeah, you heard that right, Mac Daddy. And every other line his character says feels like it's designed to confirm white America's worst fears and stereotypes about what gangster rap represents. I don't know if Ice-T was just really hurting in the 90s with, again, the success of hip-hop at the time. I can't see that being the case. He must have either gone for the money, or maybe he thought this was a more sublime parody than it actually was. Maybe he was really convinced that this was going to be his Blazing Saddles or something. But, oh God, we should be so lucky to have a guy like Mel Brooks work on the Leprechaun movies. I mean, now that I would watch. That would be friggin' fantastic. I can guarantee you that. But really, Ice-T has always been such a vocal critic of racism in America that it just kind of boggles my mind that he never objected to any of this, apparently. I would so love to try and track down some interviews with him, or even have the chance to sit down with him myself, just to really kind of try and track what his thought process was here, because, I mean, to the best of my observation, he's never really a guy who's done anything that he didn't want to do. So, I don't know, if you're out there and you're watching Ice-T, please, seriously, give me something down in the comment section here. I mean, I have to know. Why, dude? Why? I mean, obviously this didn't hurt your stock in the long run, and there's nothing that you could do to turn me against you at this point, but come on, man. I barely have anything to say about the Leprechaun himself in this one because, as I said before, he is barely in this movie. He's even more retracted here than he was in Leprechaun 4. And furthermore, Warwick Davis does sort of seem like he is getting a little bit weary of the franchise at this point. There were hints of that in Leprechaun 4, but you really see him looking sort of fed up and tired with it and almost kind of over it here. It does sort of feel like he's on his way out. I mean, and this was his second to last movie as the character, so that probably was the case. I mean, again, look, I have no insight into what his mentality was like in this production whatsoever, but it really feels like his enthusiasm had pretty much petered out at this point. Again, he's a pro and he doesn't phone it in, but that said, he looks tired. He looks like he's had about enough of this character at this point. I mean, you do get to see the Leprechaun wreak a little bit more directly gory carnage than you did in the previous one, but every single one of those moments, with the exception of the Afro Pick kill in the opening scene, it just kind of consists of him using his magical powers to make someone's chest explode. And honestly, you could probably just make it look like other characters were shooting each other in those same scenes with a few small edits. This again does sort of feel like there was a half-assed gangster script just lying around that nobody wanted to make. And then they just decided to slap the Leprechaun property face onto it and see if they could salvage something out of it that way. Based on the number of people who labored over the story and the screenplay, logically that probably was not the case, but that's really what it feels like. And there's probably a lot of missing reels to this one too. Like, there's a couple of moments, pretty crucial moments actually, where one character dies, and then later on at the end, when the amulet looks like it's about to come crashing down on the Leprechaun and freeze him or petrify him again. And in both those instances, the movie just cuts to black, and then hard open in the next scene where you don't know how much time has passed. The first moment of those is when the Leprechaun forces the character Stray Bullet to shoot himself in the head. He cocks the gun under his chin, and when he shoots himself, it just kind of cuts to black while someone yells no. And then in the next scene, it's just the remaining two guys talking in their car about what their next step is going to be. And again, we're talking about a direct hard cut from them being in a room with the Leprechaun, and it ends off with a guy shooting himself. So what happened after that? Did the Leprechaun try to kill any other guys? Did they try to chase him? Did they just sort of call it around and say, okay, I'm going to come back and kick your ass in 2 days. Are you available then? Like, what happened? There have to be missing reels here, man. Like, that's just such a jump. Or they even have his body in their car. So, like, what happened there? Like, I mean, did they have time to carry it and move it and without the Leprechaun interfering? It couldn't have been because they didn't have the budget to film the character committing suicide, because you see the aftermath while he's sitting there in the car. It's just such a weird decision. And I know I have stated and restated at this point that continuity and coherence is not exactly this franchise's strong suit, but I still like to know, at least a little bit about how things happen in a movie, like how we get from point A to point B, just as a courtesy, maybe. Similarly, when Ice-T's character Mac Daddy throws that amulet in the air, the way that the scene ends, even though it cuts to black, it implies that the amulet froze the Leprechaun again. But then when we get to the next scene, Postmaster P is performing as a successful solo artist, while the Leprechaun is revealed to be controlling him and manipulating him behind the scenes. So what happened there? The amulet essentially represents a prison to the Leprechaun, so I can't see why he would want to keep it around. I mean, again, did they negotiate something initially and then the Leprechaun got under his skin, or what? Like, again, it's just such a vast jump forward that it's almost kind of insulting. It's like it's almost made with a certain amount of contempt for the storytelling. I know we're not talking about high art here, but I still think, as ever, that just because you're making a genre film or a big goof off like this, that's still not an excuse to half-ass anything. And I'm not even asking for the writing to be overly ambitious in this case. I'm just asking for it to make sense, to feel like a finished script. Because there are here and there ideas that could have been developed into something a little bit more fun or clever, but none of them really go anywhere. I mean, as an example, even though it initially did feel very dated when the characters have sort of a phobic reaction to that one transgender character in the movie sort of gives them some comeuppance at the end when they are forced to disguise themselves in drag to seek revenge on the Leprechaun. At least I'm trying to tell myself that that was their intention. Maybe they just thought it was really funny to have these guys dress up that way. I don't know. and making one of the characters die in drag while he tells his friend that he really hopes there's Kitty in heaven. Um, yeah, like again, where do you start? You could make a whole grad school thesis out of a moment like that. Oh, and I didn't even mention the fact that the whole MacGuffin that puts everything in motion this time is a gold flute rather than a pot of gold. A magic flute that just enthralls everyone who hears it. Now, how Ice-T and the rest of the actors in this movie manage to keep a straight face while they argue back and forth about who really owns the motherfucking flute, I'll never know. And this golden flute, by the way, is apparently so magical that it has an invisible symbol attached to it, because every time someone plays this flute, it ends off with a nice, light, shimmering cymbal roll. Well played, but it's just so silly. I mean, like the first couple of times that happened, it took me a minute to sort of like look and check and even rewind and sort of see, like, is this part of the score, or is this actually like a diegetic sound that this flute is producing? And after some careful analysis, I can say that yes, this magic flute just has an invisible magic symbol. And again, I know this isn't like your fault, Ice-T, but you're a professional goddamn musician. Did you never feel the need to say something to someone? Speaking of saying something, one final honorary Jameson Award nomination that I will add to this one. That's right, in The Hood scored a daily double. There's a point where our hip-hop heroes have the chance to pitch themselves to the head of another major record label. Yeah, believe it or not, there's someone more major than Mac Daddy in this universe. And this guy is, honest to God, like a 5'0" white boy from the Midwest or something like that, dressed in a big fur coat and a big stereotypical pimp outfit, and talking like a white boy, but speaking hip-hop language. Isn't it funny when I talk about pimps and hoes and being G'd up with a very square white voice? Well, it's funny if you're Richard Pryor or Eddie Murphy. It's not funny if you're this guy. And the way that these three presumably poor African American hip hop artists are made to grovel at the feet of this white record label pimp, it's just wow. Again, like, I don't know how Ice-T didn't shoot this guy for real. It's just wild, just blows my mind. So honestly, I'm not even sure if I can recommend this one as a so bad it's good watch just for fun. I mean, I was having a riot while I was watching it, but part of it was because so much of it feels just desperate and dated, and again, it would be offensive if it wasn't so ridiculous with its negative stereotyping. But whereas I could definitely sit down with some friends to party and watch Leprechaun 4 again, the more I think about Leprechaun in the Hood after watching it, the less interested I am in revisiting it. I would say watch this one once if you are insanely curious, but just like the Ginger Ninja, don't say I didn't warn you. Do not under any circumstances pay to rent this movie, don't buy this movie. To be bought it so you don't have to, and be grateful for that. Now, normally in this kind of a situation, I would say that at least now I know the worst is behind me, but it looks like we're going back to the Hood for the next movie, so I'm not going to count my chickens yet. Yeah, Leprechaun in the Hood. I don't know what to say. I barely knew where to start. I don't know where to end, but I'm just going to end it here. Thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned to the channel for the next installment sooner rather than later, and I will catch you all real soon. Take care. Oh, and P.S., how does Leprechaun 3 set in Las Vegas have a rap battle, but Leprechaun in the Hood doesn't? I mean, yeah, like William Hurt said in A History of Violence, how do you fuck that up? Oh well.